was a little strange. He was making fun of the writers of the speech he was giving as if he hadn't even read it beforehand.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Let's see. Okay, so the NDAA. As I was getting ready to send you the show notes, I take a little time to slack off on social media, and then I see the NDAA merges the U.S. and Israeli militaries, and I'm like, what? What's the kernel of truth here? It can't just be that. That would be a gigantic, elaborate process. So, what is it? What is it? Political science professor Mike? I'm not a professor, he says.
The U.S. normally doesn't pass a budget, right? The presidential administration puts out a budget. It's like, this is what we want. And then Congress passes a whole bunch of different bills to fund things in the government. So the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. It's
Yes,
the
okay.
money for the whole military. So when you think of the military, the NDAA is a series of bills to pay for it every year, right? That's why they had all these hearings about the Pentagon asking for 1.5 billion and asking for additional money for the Iran war and all that other stuff, or not 1.5 billion, 1.5 trillion, trillion, is that they're trying to increase the amount of money they receive to fund the military, to pay for the troops, to buy the things, to pay for the ships, to pay for the guns and the bullets and the bombs, right? The NDAA is the vehicle that Congress pays for the military, all of it. And occasionally more money is added in other bills. So the One Big Beautiful bill added some money to the military from a separate funding source to do certain things. But most of the money goes in this one big piece of legislation. And so what that means is that all the pork gets added into the NDAA. Also, usually it passes with broad bipartisan support, because one of the things that they did for the military industrial complex is that virtually every congressional district in the US has a military base or some kind of factory that makes stuff for the military. And so every congressperson has some stake in making sure that defense appropriations get passed, because it's jobs and money and stuff for their districts. And so this is the big thing, right? This is one of the biggest votes every year. Virtually all of Congress spends months negotiating various aspects of it with 30. There's a whole bunch of different committees that all feed into this one piece of legislation. And talking about what you're talking about, the US and Israel merging their militaries, it's not a one-to-one merging. What it is they're integrating some of their communication, some of their intel sharing, some of their technology, some of the logistics, but the command structures are completely separate, right? The US president controls US forces, the Israeli prime minister commands the Israeli forces. It's not merging US and Israel, but it would be more than what's happening now. Because what's happening now is they have completely separate entities, right? Like the US communicates with Israel and back and forth, all that kind of stuff. Actually, I don't know the specifics of it because a lot of that kind of stuff is classified. But my understanding of it is that what this particular piece of legislation does, or is trying to do, is to increase the amount of communication that the US has with Israel much more than it currently does. But it's not a mutual defense thing. NATO is very integrated with the US military, for example, where the NATO forces train with the US. We use very similar weapon systems and hardware, which makes sense, right? For NATO, if the US technically would have to be anywhere that gets attacked by NATO, the systems have to be similar. The weapon systems, the communication systems, the various types of planes and ships and guns. You want them all to be like interchangeable and something that you can all use, because you don't know where the fight's going to be. And so it would be a whole mess if I'm talking about NATO, for example. It'd be a whole mess if NATO, with its 4 million or whatever troops at its disposal, if push comes to shove, if they couldn't actually fire their guns, right? Because they have 12 different types of guns and 12 of bullets and all that stuff. So you want some sort of uniformity there. And what's clear is that Israel is one of the largest recipients of foreign aid from the United States, that receives a lot of military aid from the United States. is one of the staunchest allies that the United States has right now in the Middle East. And so this is a way to improve our ability to communicate with them
Yeah.
and to, it's not merging though. It is separate
Yeah.
commands, but it definitely is a more. That's the thing. I'm reading through it. What it is doing is allocating money for shared research projects. So anti-drone projects, artificial intelligence, and it's addressing supply chain issues. So if there's anything that Israel uses that the US also uses, there's talking with each other more is the big thing here. So instead of going through separate supply chains, what they're doing is they're cooperating more on those supply chain issues to ensure that both have the supplies they need, right? And so that is a little bit different than what's going on now, that each country has their own unique supply chains and logistics. In that sense, there is an argument that could be made that it is merging part of the military in the sense of the supply chain part, that they're cooperating and talking more specifically for that aspect of it. But that's a semantic distinction, right? Supply chain stuff is more like a company makes something and both of them need that. So they'll just use the same transport to get those things to each other, right? That's something that allies do. That's something that NATO does already, right? It's not as if the United States doesn't do this with any other country in the world. We definitely do with NATO, right? Because NATO's a combined force. Honestly, there's an argument to be made that we do something similar with South Korea, because South Korean troops are stationed with the US troops in the DMZ, and they also are trained. There's a lot of different troops that come to the United States for training. The United States trains up. It's not just that. Like when the US gives military aid to foreign countries, usually it's US weapon systems and US drones and US stuff. And the US generally is the one overseeing those systems and communicating to those countries, right? For maintaining certain types of planes, for instance. It's not like those countries have the technological expertise and wherewithal to do that. It's usually if they need something fixed, they have the US fix it, right? Because US has the mechanics. US has the experts, right? That's part of the selling point that the US gives to the rest of the countries of the world, like buy our stuff and then we'll help you oversee it and fix it and stuff. This isn't new. It's just new to the US and the Israel relationship. I understand why they're doing it. We're currently engaged in a war, and Israel is the main ally in that war. So you would expect we'd talk to them, right? That we, at an absolute minimum, that they're not bombing the same targets and that they're not flying their planes into each other, and that there's some level of communication more than nice weather we're having or something like.
Yes.
Look, this is even new to the warfare. The Allied Expeditionary Force did a lot of this stuff. What do you think the World War II was with Eisenhower? They combined a ton of different militaries and resources and supply chains and logistics to make it all work, right? Same with World War One with Pershing. They weren't separate. Yes, they were separate militaries, but they worked together to achieve an outcome. And the working together part means making sure that supplies get to where they need to get to. Have you ever seen the movie Greyhound, the convoys in the Atlantic?
No, I haven't.
So the gist of the movie is that during World War II, there were convoys of ships that would travel across the Atlantic to bring supplies, right, to England and to the various fronts of the war, and that they would cooperate in giant flotillas of ships to try and fight off submarines while they're crossing when they lost air cover. So that wasn't just U.S. ships. That was a whole assortment of ships from all over the place. If you in the movie, they've got Canadian ships, they've got British ships, they've got French ships. It's a whole list of different groups working together to achieve an outcome. Same kind of thing here. We're not integrating the military. We're not merging the military. What it sounds like from what I'm reading is that the U.S. is spending a little bit of money, not a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, but a little bit of money in the grand scheme of things, like less than 1% of the total NDAA, to improve our communication with Israel. That's it. That's what I see. Which it's not surprising. Doesn't seem even that controversial.
Sure. So I wonder two things. One, there's a lot of pushback about this. There's a lot of, we don't like this. And that is for reasons which are new, but which I understand. in terms of how much do we want to help what may or may not be wars of choice in another part of the world. So that's been developing. But then, I guess a more salient, I don't know if it's more salient, a question that comes more to the fore in my mind is, words like the militaries are merging. And then how many low information voters are going to see that and are going to be like, their militaries merged, and they're talking with other low information voters, and they don't have the context. But what exactly is the question here? I don't know. It's just kind of like, ain't it sad that there's so much information out there, and a lot of it is alternative facts or incomplete information.
Okay, it's not necessarily completely incorrect that the US and Israel are merging their militaries, because in some respects they're merging certain aspects of the military supply chain, right? So they're working together on projects, as in they're sharing technologies and state of the art innovations in such a way that both have access to the benefits, both are funding it, and that the essentially that what it means is it's not severable, that we're not being treated as two unique discrete countries, that certain aspects of it are so intertwined that we couldn't decide all of a sudden to just stop, that it's enshrining
Right.
in law that certain aspects of our research and development and advances are such that when we know it, Israel would know it. And the argument being made, and I don't know that it's a fair, maybe not fair, it might be a little too skeptical or paranoid, but the argument that I've seen being made is that intertwining the cutting edge of technology in such a way puts us at a strategic disadvantage if there's ever a situation where Israel, for whatever reason, stops being our friend. If we ever reach a point at any point in our history in the future where we have to just stop sharing anything with Israel because they may not be our enemy, but they're certainly not our ally anymore, maybe just like a neutral for whatever reason, right? If Israel just expands dramatically and becomes like a giant country and doesn't want to be friends with us anymore, who knows? But if it ever reaches that point, we're so intertwined on some of these things that they would know our vulnerabilities, right? They would know that
Yes.
instead of us having state of the art technologies and advances and things, remember, this actually goes back to a conversation we had much earlier in the podcast, that the very best weapon is the one you never use until you absolutely have to, right?
Yep.
That nobody knows about it until at the last second you use it, and it does something that nobody has adequately prepared for, and you win, right? Because it's the element of surprise. Once everybody can figure out how to counter what you're doing or to make what you're doing or use what you're doing, it's much more difficult to fight on an even playing field. The same
Well,
argument.
the very best would be you don't use it at all, but that's minor. Please continue.
Absolutely, unless you absolutely have to, the like break glass in case of emergency thing, right? That if you just use weapons that everybody understands and knows about, and you can win that way, do that, because that way at least you're winning, but you're not losing in the long run. What we don't want is that the best kept secrets. Okay, say for instance, aliens are real, and that the United States in, I don't know, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, who knows how long, got the alien technology, and that they've secretly been figuring out how to actually use any of that technology. Nobody else would know about it, right? Because it's completely extraterrestrial, right? It's literally from outer space. And so that kind of technology you wouldn't want anyone to really know about unless you had to use it. And so the argument here is that if the United States is integrating some of the research for quantum computing, for energy weapons, for drones, for artificial intelligence, for certain kinds of targeting systems, like that's the very, very cutting edge of technology. That's the very forefront. The problem is that we don't know how stable Israel's internal security apparatuses are, and we don't know if any of that could be leaked. We don't have control. Once that information's out there, the US doesn't have as robust control on where it goes. If, say, somebody wants to sell it on the black market for money, all that kind of stuff, because our ability to engage in security controls is very robust, obviously within the borders of the United States, but it's considered espionage if it was done in Israel. And so you would just have to hope that Israel has the very best internal security. But that's obviously not true because October 7th happened. They got attacked by people on hang gliders who walked into the country and killed a bunch of people. And so the worry is that if this technology were to get in the hands of the wrong people,
Right.
it would pose a real risk. And so
Mhm.
those arguments, like I understand those arguments that
Mhm.
Israel is a smaller country that doesn't have as big of a military and that is surrounded by enemies on all sides, may be more vulnerable to certain types of espionage or infiltration than the United States is, because the United States is a giant country with massive oceans on both sides. So the likelihood is lower of these types of technologies getting into the hands of people who actually use them. And that's a worry. I get it. But it's one of those things where, like, we need allies in the world, right? We need NATO. And this is one of those things where it looks like it's a way to improve the US Israeli relationship by saying, look, we'll strengthen it because we're in
Mhm.
this together, right? We're in winning the war together, or we're in maintaining whatever security or whatever these interests are together. And so I get both sides of this particular issue. That one side's like we just need to strengthen the relationship so we help further ingratiate Israel to U.S. interests and to help us out more in the future. And I also get the
Mhm.
argument that Israel is a very complicated, unpredictable place, and it's not necessarily the case that the prevailing political winds within Israel will always favor supporting U.S. interests or being on the side of the U.S. It's not necessarily the case, right?
Yeah.
Remember, most countries fail eventually for one reason or another. They fall apart, they split up into different groups, they get invaded and destroyed, right? And the vulnerability of Israel is that they're a tiny country in a great big world, and they've got enemies in all directions.
Hopefully, it's if it's coordination, that it's coordination if worst comes to worst, and hopefully worst won't come to worst. So, did you see the Correspondents' dinner?
I did, yeah, I watched it from beginning to end.
You watched the whole Trump speech. Wow.
Yeah, no, I watched it through C-SPAN on YouTube, so I watched also I listened to the callers, I listened to the stuff beforehand, the interviews they did with journalists and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah,
Okay, what did you think of it?
I don't think Trump's very funny. He
Hmm.
doesn't have a good timing for humor. That he over explains jokes for some of the punchlines, and he was it was a little strange. He was making fun of the writers of the speech he was giving as if he hadn't even read it beforehand, as if he was reading everything for the very first time. I don't know. I'm always puzzled when Trump is speaking in any kind of situation where he's not completely in control of the whole message because he seems sometimes like a fish out of water, right? When I'm listening to it, look, some of those jokes might have been funny if you're like a really mean person, right? If being mean to people or being a bully is the sort of daily dose of information that you receive, I guess some of them could have been funny, but a lot of it was just mean. In
Right.
comedy, you don't punch down. The idea is that it's in poor taste to punch down with jokes, to talk about the poor, the dispossessed, the disabled, to make jokes at the expense of other people. And so for me, it wasn't very funny. The joke about running in 2028 or that he won 4 elections, right? Not funny at all. I don't think it landed.
Which one's the fourth?
That these are my questions. But it just was very confusing. Did he run in the 2000s as a reform candidate? I'm trying to remember if he.
Yeah, at some point he was a candidate, but I don't know if he appeared in any debates.
Yeah, with
Um.
Buchanan. That was a long time ago. But the point is, some of his jokes were just not. I didn't find them very funny. I thought The Mentalist was pretty cool. It was different because normally they have a comedian for the Correspondence Dinner who does stand up, but The Mentalist was different. It was a different kind of entertainment. And I'm normally not critical of whoever the Correspondence Dinner decides to bring on as the entertainment because they're entertainers, right? It's a dinner show. They're there to. It's not political, really. Actually, The Mentalist was pretty funny because he kept cracking political jokes about tariffs and some other stuff that was very subtle, but also cracking digs to some of the Trump administration officials that I found funny, that maybe were not supposed to be super funny, but they just were. But yeah, that part, I think, if anybody wants to actually see something funny or interesting from the Correspondents' Dinner, that part was pretty good. And then there were three speeches that I thought were decent. So Wolf Blitzer talking about the Wall Street Journal covering the Epstein files right next to where Trump's sitting, I thought was pretty in your face, courageous talk where he's praising the Wall Street Journal at cracking the case essentially of getting the Epstein files released and holding the Trump administration to account for not releasing them all in a timely manner. That was a pretty good speech. And then they gave awards to photojournalists, to people who take photos, right, through
Yeah.
photography at White House events and all that. For the first time ever, my understanding is they gave it to a woman, and she gave this really great speech, which I think is worth listening to, about always trying to, that, you know, seeking the truth and trying to always break through barriers is a constant sort of struggle, that you have to just keep pushing forward and not give up, that truth matters. And I thought it was a very good speech, given the circumstances right now in the US of how we're losing sight of an objective grasp on what the truth is. But I think that resonated with me a little bit more than some of the other speeches, because one of the fired CBS 60-minute correspondents was saying that she'd been instructed to spread misinformation and lies essentially, and that if we lose sight of our share or objective reality, then what do we have? Is the idea there. And so I think that was resonating with me a little bit when I was listening to the journalist. So the Correspondents' Dinner is so weird because, yes, Trump gives a speech, but they're also giving out scholarships. They're giving out awards to journalists. They have these speeches. They have all these subtle digs that they're making at the president as he's there. They're doing all these videos of past presidents and past speeches and like the history of the Correspondents' Dinner. But if you know what to look for in terms of how they're presenting some of this stuff, it's very in your face. And maybe it's just because I judge debates so long that I can recognize arguments when they're being made, but it's very in your face if you listen to those videos and some of the speeches and audio, that they're saying that the Trump administration is really mean to journalists and not nice compared to some of these past administrations in the way that it values the First Amendment and freedom of speech and the truth. Maybe it was meant to be subtle, but it wasn't subtle to me, right? I thought it was pretty right there in front of them, which I thought that was interesting. But no, I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of the Correspondents' Dinner, it's pretty much what I expected was going to happen. Trump would show up, he'd say a bunch of mean things, a lot of his jokes would fall flat. Probably the best highlights were the speeches that weren't Trump, right? Everybody else actually was talking about important things. Journalism isn't fading into memory, right? They still serve a very important role in America and the world. And it was clear, at least from what I heard, that they're not giving up, right? Even when they get sued, even when they get subpoenaed. Okay, Caitlin Collins is a good example. She got an award, and then Trump made fun of her right there in front of Caitlin Collins after she got the award. He essentially derided her. But she's there. She didn't leave. She didn't run in fear or hide in shame or whatever when the leader of the free world started criticizing her right after she won an award for journalism. Sometimes it really is just staring power in the face and showing your own truth. That, I know it seems performative, but the journalists standing in solidarity there, awarding some of these awards to the Wall Street Journal or Caitlin Collins while hosting the president, sent its own kind of message, right? If that makes any sense. That they're not,
So,
they're not giving up.
yeah. So I'm glad that they redid it, given the violence. But it's always just, it's like we're living in bizarre world here in Trump 2. Here's an excerpt of what he said. Quote, "He'd never get an answer. Who's the most transparent president? Peter. Who? Who? I look at him. It's the first time he's tongue-tied. I cannot believe it. Oh, he's gonna go be happy tomorrow. But you people have no idea how lucky you are, you people, the press. When I'm gone, you're all gonna be broke. Your business model is gonna be finished. No, it's true. When I'm not around, you're gonna be broke. There's not gonna be anybody to report on. Nobody gives a damn about anybody else. The New York Times the other day had 5 stories about me." Okay, end of quote. So it's nice that they have this but it's always just warped by just a lack of graciousness. Wish we had a gracious president. I wish a lot of things.
Okay, so I've watched a few of these correspondence dinners over the years. I don't know if you ever saw the one where Stephen Colbert got Helen Thomas to chase Bush around with questions. That one I always found. I don't know if you've ever seen it. That one was pretty amusing. Anyways, sorry. Honestly, that would have been a real message to Trump if Stephen Colbert had been invited after getting fired from CBS. If he'd just been there, if they had some kind of skit with him or something to show solidarity with. Here's the thing. Technically, if you listen to the debate around late show hosts and late night TV shows, technically they fall within the purview of journalism because they were trying to use a rule related to journalism to punish these late night TV shows, the fair time rule or whatever it is. And honestly, look, I know this seems strange. It would be really interesting if late night comedy shows actually had White House correspondents that just showed up and had their own separate kind of, not satire, but like different kinds of questions they'd ask, mainly about why do you hate comedy or why are you trying to get us all fired? Things like where they ask them to their face, what are you doing? I think the closest anyone's done that is The Daily Show when they show up to political conventions and they interview people and do all that. I don't know, though. Stephen Colbert, he used to interview Congress people in their offices, which was pretty amusing, where he'd just pick a congressperson and go to their office and talk to them.
Yeah.
I wish comedy shows would do more of that, where they'd go and try to talk to administration officials and just ask them, why are you doing this? Why are you so mean? Can you not laugh? Is life just so serious that there is no humor? This is new, right? It was a little strange and a lot disappointing that the original one in April had 2,600 people and this had 700 people in the audience. That means that they dramatically reduced the number of people participating. It's a bit of a metaphor for where America is right now, that essentially they whittled it down to the top echelon of journalists in terms of who was actually allowed in the room. It's one of the US's richest presidents was speaking in this hotel, right? It's the similar thing of how I think about the ballroom, that he wants to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a ballroom that most people will never step foot in, right? Due to where it's located. Most people will never, ever go into that ballroom. It will be limited to a very limited handful of people for state events, parties and stuff. But most people don't have that level of access, period. And so that's what I thought, that it's a metaphor for where the United States is right now in terms of income inequality, that you've got some people who are just incredibly wealthy, living way up in the clouds, and then everybody else just watches on in, I don't know, fascination, curiosity, abject despair over what's going on, because you have one of the most powerful people in the world being mean and trying to make it sound funny and talking about running in 2028 as if it's a joke, right? But why is he even talking about that?
Yeah, who knows? By the way, just to clarify a previous remark here, Trump ran in 2000 with the Reform Party. He exited the race prior to any of the primaries in the Reform Party, but he still won California and Michigan, the Reform Party primaries there.
It could be that's what he was referring to, that he won. He won in quotes, right?
Right, he won in 2016, 2024, and in 2000 in the Reform Party primaries of California and Michigan. He won those, so good job.
Or I misheard it for 4 elections, or what he meant was that he's going to win the election in 2028. So that would be winning 4 elections, right? He won 20. He's claiming he won in 2020. He won 2024, and then he's saying that he will win if he runs in 2028.
It's an opinion podcast. We don't have a White House correspondent. Mondays with Mike.